it's really something super fantastic here. You couldn't ever imagine this. Roger, we know about that. Could you go the other way? Go back the other way.
Okay, so welcome everyone to this wonderful, amazing panel we have been organized today. So we are going to discuss about everything ranging from astrobiology, analog astronaut research, to space exploration and whatnot. Everything today with our wonderful panelists present over here. So quickly, I will make sure you know our panelists first, starting from Dr. Siddharth Pandey. And he's the head of excellence of astrobiology at Amity University, India. He's leading an initiative to establish India's first dedicated center for astrobiology and space biology research. He's also a space engineer with project management and leadership experience working with teams of astrobiologists. He has experience in building space collection instruments for Mars and Venus surface missions while he was working at NASA Ames, USA. Now he has been engaged in education and public outreach activities and is motivated to use space as a tool. For what? We'll see in the panel. Next, I would like to introduce our wonderful Dr. Graham Lau, who is an astrobiologist and a communicator of science. He has academic background spanning from chemistry, biology, astrophysics to geology. He is an expert on how living things affect the environment around them and how we can search for alien life beyond Earth. So we'll be talking about that in our panel too. He also serves as the Director of Communications and Marketing for Blue Marble Space, and he's a research scientist with BMS as well, and he's the Director of Logistics for the University Rover Challenge. He is also the host of Ask an Astrobiologist, which is a NASA-funded program. Dr. Lau also serves as a meditation instructor and a public speaking coach. So how varied is the experiences of a wonderful panel present here? It doesn't end with that. Here we have Professor Julio Rezende, a pioneer in Brazil, promoting quality education related to space, sustainability, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And he relates everything to Mars. So he researches on identifying possible solutions to be applied to arid and semi-arid regions, and he's relating how self-sustaining habitats can work in such kind of areas by promoting space sustainability. He has published more than 10 books on sustainability and innovation. But not just that, he's the coordinator of the Space Analog Station Habitat Mart and also performs lectures in different countries about sustainability, innovation, and management. So there's a lot of things our panelists do, and we're going to talk about everything in today's panel. Now, last but not least, our wonderful Karen Branderman. She has academic background in psychology, business information system, and she's currently pursuing doctoral degree in management. She's a consultant and a project manager with special interest in psychological and intercultural issues in future Mars exploration. Imagine she's researching on intercultural issues in future Mars exploration. How interesting is that? And that's one of the topics we are going to talk in today's panel. She's also a flight planner for the Austrian Space Forum's Amadi 20 analog Mars mission. So we are going to talk about that too. But it's not that. She also teaches psychology, project management, and intercultural competence as a lecturer and in various nations. So I would love to welcome all our panelists for this wonderful conversation we are going to have. So welcome all panelists. I'm so excited to start our discussion. So we start right away. You have any words before we start for our audience?
No, I'll just say something. It's a pleasure to join you all. First off, I am watching in the YouTube right now as well for the chat, but anyone who wants to reach out, I'm sure all four of us would love to connect with anyone watching after this panel. But I love that Elon has brought us together from so many different kind of perspectives and ideas that we share. We're also in 4 separate time zones around the entire planet. And so I'm really glad to have this now as a global discussion about astrobiology, sustainability, analog habitats, and far more.
I'm also
Thank you
really
for that,
happy
Professor Lam.
and honored to be part of this exciting panel. As Dr. Graham already said, it is very multidisciplinary. We have different approaches, different viewpoints on how we work on space exploration. And I think that's an absolute must. If we want to go to Mars, we must view it from different perspectives, from different backgrounds. So I think this panel is a very good representation of our way forward to Mars.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Graham and Professor Karen. So, as Graham has mentioned for us, we are connecting from different time zones. So, we want to wish everybody in different salutations like good afternoon, good evening. For some of them, it's good morning. So, such is the varied panel we have today. And we can extrapolate it to space exploration as well, because it's a very transdisciplinary arena. And that's what we are going to discuss today as well. How transdisciplinary is it? How can you join the space exploration? And how you can relate yourself wherever you are with the space industry. So we can quickly start talking about all the various experiences our wonderful panelists have, so you can know more about how to get involved in space industry. So let's start. I would like to go first with Professor Julio. So, Professor, what do you think is can you say more about what is an analog habitat and what's the importance of it, and what really happens in an analog habitat? Our students have this question of how analog habitat functions. So, can you tell the importance and what happens over there?
Okay, Elon, thanks so much for your question. And I'd like to say hello to everybody in this audience today. It's a great pleasure. The analog habitats, the main goal is try to reproduce the same conditions that is supposed to be operating on Mars, or Moon, or also International Space Station. Also anticipating some possible situations that would be happening during the space exploration. Also, we have some analog stations in the world. Also, two stations in Poland, two in United States, also one in Canada, and one in Brazil. Also, Israel and Oman and China. In this case, I believe we have around 10 different programs in the world. Also, these stations are trying to develop two main categories of activities: the intravehicular activities inside the station, and also the extravehicular activities when these activities happening in the landscape, in physical landscape. In the extravehicular activities, or EVAs, normally the participants are using the space suits, the normal space suits. And then from this point, it's possible to provide a lot of learnings, also to reproduce the conditions of future operation of a space station.
Wow, that's amazing, Professor. Thank you for that. And as a flight planner and a crew psychologist, Karen, I would like to ask to you, how are the activities commonly distributed among the crew members of an analog habitat?
Yeah, so it really depends. We have, of course, some activities, some research projects that require a certain skill. For example, if one of the analog astronauts is an astrobiologist or a geologist, and we have some research in this area, then of course the person with this specialized knowledge will perform that. If we have more generic tasks, then it's basically we make a flight plan, and we see that we distribute the tasks evenly. We distribute the tasks in a way that, for example, the extravehicular activities, as Professor Julio just described, they are pretty high workload, because depending on which analog Mars mission you are talking. If we're talking about the Amadee 20 Mars mission of the Austrian Space Forum in Israel in October, they will have spacesuit simulators. They are weighing 50 kilos. And the analog astronauts have to actually go out in them, carry the weight for 6 or more hours, and do the work. So we then see that they don't have to go out twice in a row. So if they have been out on day 1, then on day 2 somebody else goes out, and they have research to do in the habitat, and they can physically rest a bit, mentally not, because they still have to be working. But we try to even the workload.
Wow, that's great. Like there's a lots of work which goes into planning an analog crew. Yeah. So Sid sir, I would like to ask you, because we are opening our first analog habitat research in India. So what is the motive behind establishing India's first analog research base at Ladakh? And what can we expect from it in the future?
Thank you, Ilan. And again, I'm honored to be part of this very experienced team of panelists. So as you're aware, and I'd like everybody else to be aware, India so far has not had the same kind of progress in terms of analog research. And that's one thing that we would like to change. So currently, I'm heading a new center at Amity University in Mumbai. And our focus has kind of come out of an ongoing scientific program in the Himalayas, specifically in this place called Ladakh, which is a high altitude, cold, dry environment, which has several, you can say, smaller, isolated, extreme environments. We have salty lakes, hot springs, there's permafrost deposits, there's glacial meltwater, deposits, there's sand dunes, all within a small region. And it's being touted as one of the higher value sites for doing scientific research. That is, not just from astrobiology, but also eventually we're talking about climate change, because we don't see Earth and space as two different systems. The more we learn about Earth, it helps us plan for Mars and the other planets that we'd like to visit. But also, while we are planning and testing instruments and technologies for space exploration, we're actually, doing our bit to help monitor the health of our own planet and seeing how things are changing here as well. So these were some of the energies that kind of drove us to plan out a permanent, or at least to start with a semi-permanent outpost that we are calling analog station. And it's definitely started more from the scientific kind of, motivations. And that's also because Ladakh is actually a very remote and extreme environment. I mean, if you had to compare it to some of the other sites where the analog stations are established, I think it's one of the most physically demanding places to be able to work. The oxygen is 50% of what we have at sea level. It's cold, it's dry, and the radiation, of course, is also higher than what we have on sea level. So, so from that point of view, the people who are going to be part of this expedition are going to be researchers, but also students who are undertaking a lot of activity. So it's kind of a similar environment to what you have in the Antarctic or in the Arctic regions, the higher Arctic regions. So Himalayas is always referred to as the third pole of our planet, right? So we kind of treat it to that level. So it's already quite a high, you can say, high level, requiring a high level of fidelity, and also ensuring a lot of the challenges that are being faced do not kind of add to the challenges which anyways an analog station, kind of has to take into account. So by that, what I mean is that the researchers and students who are staying at such an analog site should be able to conduct and finish their exercises without having to deal so much with these extremities that come. They kind of can come in the way, or in fact add to the value of such a site as well. So yeah, that's in summary the motivations behind the station here in India that is being planned out.
Definitely, Sid sir. I agree with it. There's a lot of work goes into managing and planning and establishment of analog research, that to first time in a country like India. And we wish you all the best for opening many more analog research sites. And I hope opportunities open for students from around the world. So that's where I would like to ask Dr. Graham to share his insights from University Rover Challenge as the Director of Logistics. And also, Dr. Graham, how do you see engineering as a need in analog habitats and astrobiological explorations?
Both fun questions. So first off, the University Rover Challenge, for those who don't know, is an undergraduate engineering competition we hold every year. Students, usually around the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, will start working on designing Mars rovers. They'll have a budget up to $30,000 US to design, develop, and build Mars rovers at their universities. Oftentimes working with this is like their engineering capstone project, how they're going to graduate their engineering degrees. They also bring in students of the sciences as well, though. And these teams will come together and build these Mars rovers. And then they submit to us several times to show us that they are designing a good workable rover. And those who pass our design reviews are invited to come out to the desert in Utah at the Mars Desert Research Station to compete in this engineering competition. We give them several tasks, and they drive their rovers in these tasks. Some of them can be terrain navigation, driving over hills and around obstacles, over rocks. We have autonomous navigation where the rovers will drive themselves. We have a science task where the students will take a sample for astrobiology and try to understand, can they find signs of life using their rover, just as we would on Mars. We've had other tasks throughout the years. We change them up from time to time to keep things kind of active and challenging for the students. And for me, it's been kind of a blast over the years. I've been doing it since 2012. And so I've had an opportunity to see so many different teams from India and Turkey, the US, Canada, UK, Egypt, Poland, Bangladesh. So many different nations from around the world have designed these rovers and brought them to the desert together. And it's always fun to see how the team dynamics work with these young students, learning how to work together on a team, learning how to structure their team hierarchy. So there's leadership, there are known roles going on within the team, and then seeing them deploy and operate their rovers. And they always have a lot of fun too. At the end, we always have a little barbecue event. We have some food together, and the teams will drag race the rovers or play with the rovers and all kinds of things. And so it's very cool for me over the years to have seen this. Not just seeing the teams and how remarkable these young students are in both engineering and sciences and how they tackle the obstacles that we give them. It's also been just really fun for me to see so many different people from around the world who are engaged in this endeavor of building rovers for Mars-style exploration. A lot of these young students, they will build tomorrow's Mars rovers. They'll build tomorrow's Mars helicopters and drones and other kinds of robots and maybe even human systems, maybe even human habitats on Mars. Maybe one of our engineers right now in this University Rover Challenge will be one of the first people on Mars as an engineer or an astrobiologist. And so it's been really fun for me to see this and to do it at the Mars Desert Research Station in one of these very first Mars analog habitat environments in the desert of Utah, which already kind of has a very Martian kind of feel to it. I remember my first year in 2012, while we were doing the University Rover Challenge, the Disney production company was there creating the movie John Carter right beside us. And so we had Mars rovers running, and then we had actors sitting on top of go-karts that later were CGI'd into being giant serpents walking on a Mars-like world. And so that was very cool. To your second question, the importance of engineering and astrobiology and why we're doing these analog studies, obviously there's psychological and sociological factors that come into why we do analog studies, but there is a lot that we've learned along the way. There have been so many published research papers that have come out of the various analog stations that we've learned different engineering approaches to building habitats, for building greenhouses, for recycling systems within these habitats. And to do it in a safe environment like the Earth is a pretty smart idea before sending people straight to Mars and not really knowing what we're doing. And so we've learned a lot for the engineering, the systems engineering that way. But then for the astrobiology, we've also then been having people go out wearing these spacesuits on EVAs in their Mars environments and seeing how will we perform astrobiology in a Mars environment. When you're wearing a spacesuit or being helped by a rover, how do you collect samples? How do you process them in a lab with very limited instrumentation? When we send humans to Mars, we can't send all of the best instruments along with them. We're only going to get a few single instruments. And so we're going to have to choose the best of the best instruments to go along with the best of the best people to really do the science that we want to do when humans do go to Mars.
Definitely, Dr. Graham. I'm so impressed by all of our answers. Just like how we have varied experiences, it means lots of work and lots of energy has to be put into managing and organizing an analog habitat. And it's also, it doesn't stop with that. Of course, analog habitat functions with varied people from varied backgrounds. So this would be a very good question to ask to Professor Julio. So, Professor, you conduct virtual missions under Habitat Mart. So that's what sets apart Habitat Mart with other analog stations around the world. So how did you come up with that kind of idea? And of course, to organize a virtual mission, you have to have faced lots of difficulties. And if you can tell us about those difficulties and what were the positive outcomes of it?
Okay, thanks so much, for the question. Since the beginning of pandemics, March 2020, until that moment, we developed in situ missions in our facilities in Brazil. It's in a semi-arid region with a lot of cactus in the landscape. Until that moment, we only received in our missions participants from Brazil, and we stopped the missions when started the pandemics, and I and Davi Souza, we discussed about the possible approach to keep our activities of research, and we think about a methodology when we invite the participants to consider a possible Mars station with 7 facilities. In the 7 facilities, we are discussing different topics, like the sanitation center. We are talking about life support systems, also a launch center, talking about propellants production, also a greenhouse, talking about also botanics, also biology. And the main station, we are discussing about behavior and collaboration, and also energy center and other centers. And based on this is a very good opportunity to discuss many topics supporting the space exploration. Also was very interesting because when we started the advertisement about the space analog missions, virtual missions, we start to receive interest from many parts of the world. And this was very interesting because now we have more than 30 countries participating in the missions of Habitat Mart, and also 300 participants in this modality. And we are very happy. And also my presence here is also I doing a lot of friends, I believe, around the world also, because something important about our missions is also the inclusiveness. Also try to give some hope, because during the moment of pandemic was very disturbing. We also having a lot of bad thoughts sometimes, and also the moments of the space analog virtual missions was a very good moment to think about positive things, and also guiding our thoughts, our consciousness to a good place. And I believe this was an amazing result. And also I believe Professor Graham also is also very aware about it, also our friends. I believe the consciousness is a very interesting topic to think about the future of space exploration, because you need to how to have a positive state of consciousness during the missions. And then this is if you have a good state of mind, this would be very important. We have a creative mind to find the possible solutions. Sometimes in stressful situations that would be experienced in the future space exploration, I believe.
Definitely, Professor. I just loved your answer. As you see, participants, analog astronaut research or even space exploration is not about one single thing, going to space. It's about everything, starting from how do we get along with varied people from different kind of background, and that's where intercultural competence subject comes in. So I'd like to ask to Karen as a follow-up. What is intercultural competence, Karen? And is it related to psychology in an analog habitat? And if so, what are the problems faced by the crew due to cultural differences?
Yes, thank you for that very interesting questions. I would actually take even a step back and ask, what is culture? Because many people think when we talk about culture, it's about different nationalities. But if we think back in history, nationality is a pretty new concept. But people had culture 30,000 years ago, before there was any nation in the world. So yes, nationality nowadays plays a role because, for example, we have laws that require us to behave in a certain way, etc. But culture is so much more. Culture is also your professional culture. Yeah, we have a project management profession culture. We have an astronaut professional culture. We have an engineering professional culture. We have an organizational culture. Yeah, NASA has a very different organizational culture than my own company, and often these other cultures are overlaying the national culture. So it's not one-dimensional. It's really multi-dimensional. And yeah, what is cultural competence? Cultural competence is then the ability to act adequately in a specific situation. So intercultural competence is not knowing to hand over a business card with both hands in Japan. That's something you can easily look up on the internet. But it's knowing about different communication styles, different concepts of time, different values, different leadership styles, different followership styles, etc. And then being able to use them as the situation requires. And it's much more than training how to behave in a specific country, because yeah, there are some rules, but that's not the essence of intercultural competence. And the most difficult thing that we have to learn when becoming interculturally competent is to learn about our own culture, because we don't reflect it. It's like a very easy example. If I go to a restaurant and I order a steak, I don't have to tell the waiter to put it on a plate and to bring a fork and a knife with it. Yeah, it's so ingrained in us that we don't think about it. When we then come to different countries, there is no plates, there is no forks, there is no knives. Then we realize, aha, this is something that belongs to our culture. And that's the most difficult thing about becoming interculturally competent. And when it comes to space missions, be it to Mars or to the Moon or also to the ISS, there is, of course, the potential of misunderstandings. Yeah, so let's say I have a very indirect way of communicating. Yeah, I always ask, yeah, hello, how are you? How was your week? And before I ask, hey, did you get this information I need? Then there is other communication styles that are very direct, and they say, hi, where is my information? And we then think that's rude, but it's not. It's just a different style of communicating. and both have their pros and their cons. So if we have different ways of doing something, it's not that one way is better than the other, it's just different. And we also need to consider that even the STEM subjects, they have a cultural element to them. We had a very, very massive cultural failure in the 1990s when the Mars Climate Orbiter crashed into Mars because one organization was working with imperial measurements, the other was working with metric systems, and then they sent data and they didn't translate the units. So one was sending the information in pound force, and they took the number and sent it as a command in Newton. And NASA lost, I think, about $200 million at the time, and of course, years of science. And whereas 2 + 2 is always 4, 2 pound force plus 2 newtons is not 4. And we have to be aware that the STEM subjects are embedded in a cultural concept, in a cultural context, and that's what is not really widely recognized yet. And yes, this can lead to problems, but on the other hand, cultural differences can be a big advantage, because if I have 2 ways of doing things, I can combine them. Or one way of doing things doesn't work anymore because there is a problem. Then I have 3 people from 3 different cultures who have 3 different ways of doing it, and I can try the next one, and maybe that works. And intercultural competence should actually lead to synergies and to creating something bigger than we have in a monoculture. Doesn't exist. It's a theoretical concept. There is no 2 people from the very same culture. And especially when it comes to space exploration, resources are the bottleneck. And if we can combine different cultures to actually make better use of the resources we have, this is exactly what we need. So we should not just, of course, it's important to avoid misunderstandings, miscalculations, conflict, but it's equally important to actually find the synergies.
Definitely, Karen. So you would have explained our participant how complicated and wonderful is the field of space exploration, and we wouldn't have had idea that intercultural competence or people from different background we face problems, or how is that kind of scenario going to turn out in an analog habitat. So this is something very inspiring and wonderful, to be frank. And I have a question to Dr. Graham. So Dr. Graham's Blue Marble Space is a multicultural environment, and when it is compared to an analog habitat, we have adults or trained astronauts coming to analog habitats. But it is not the same with Blue Marble Space, because there are lots of undergrads from around the world participating as research associates. So there should be lots of challenges which you should have faced in the past. So what does a multicultural educational initiative demand in terms of management?
Yeah, well, thanks. First off, I should point out to our audience that Elin herself is one of our research associates this summer in our Young Scientist program at Blue Marble Space. Sid, as well, is one of our research scientists at Blue Marble Space. And we are a very diverse organization. We have over 60 scientists from around the world who are researchers with Blue Marble Space Institute of Science. And then this summer, our Blue Marble Space Institute of Science Young Scientist program has 127 participants from over 20 nations. And originally we had well over 300 applications from 48 countries come in for this summer's program. These young students are undergraduates or recent undergraduates who have bachelor's degrees. They're working with our scientists on a variety of projects in astrobiology, in earth and space science, in science communication. And they also, during this internship, beyond doing research, they're also learning about philosophy and ethics. They're having a conversation about the ethics of whaling and using whale meat for food right now. They undertake a variety of programs in science communication, learning how to share their science, share their knowledge with other people in a variety of ways through journalism and speaking and all kinds of other means. And so to me, I think it's the best internship on the planet, personally. And as I am the director of the program as well, you're right, there is a lot to manage. It does require a lot of work, specifically since we do have so many students from around the globe, from different time zones, different countries, and there are some cultural differences in how people speak to each other in email formats, how people address each other. And so, I have to be very thoughtful about that. And that's the important thing I think we need for space exploration as well, is people being thoughtful, realizing that your way of doing things is not the only way of doing things. And I think Karen really beautifully put it to us, these differences that we do face and how we are improved through our differences. When we have differences, it allows us to look at problems differently together. But we also have to be willing to accept that sometimes the way we do things is also going to be different from someone else's way. And we have to consider how they're doing something before just telling them, no, it's my way or the highway. That, you have to do what I say, because that won't get us anywhere. And so I think, for our young students in this program, the Young Scientist program, they're learning about philosophy and science communication and research, but they're also learning how to network with other individuals who are interested in science and engineering from around the world. And honestly, space exploration, astrobiology, building analog habitats, studying human factors, and then the psychology and sociology of how we're going to go to Mars and on other places, all of these things are driving us into a global citizenship. It's making us think, not just, what our culture is, but how we share cultures, how we share the world. And I myself, I'm very blessed in that I get to speak with students from around the world, from so many nations. And even though this pandemic has been very tragic, we've lost a lot of people. We've all undergone a serious introspection with ourselves, just thinking about how we deal with being isolated, feeling alone. Depression has been on the rise. We all have to work together to get through this pandemic. But one great thing that I've seen come from it is it's causing us to connect online more than ever before. And I think because of the pandemic, we had so many applications to our program this summer. So many young students who are realizing because they can connect online, they also can apply for internships and fellowships and grants and opportunities and jobs in other nations without having to leave their home. And that allows us as educators, as mentors, to share our knowledge with people from across the planet. And I really appreciate that. I love that. But you're right, there is a lot of work that goes into managing and thinking through how we now train when we do have different approaches and different opinions and different backgrounds and how we approach a problem.
Definitely, Dr. Love. I agree on the point that the pandemic has connected us. So I wouldn't say this is, of course, this is a very, very tough time for everybody. Let's focus on the good side of it. And I'm one of the byproduct of it. I made the pandemic to good use, and that's how all the panelists are my wonderful mentors as well. I'm very proud to say that. So I have another follow-up question to Dr. Siddharth. So Dr. Sid, do you think space biology research is the first step towards successful human space exploration? And as we all know, Dr. Sid is establishing space biology research in India. So is that the reason for establishing country's first space biology research center, sir?
In some ways, it was linked with my own personal journey. So as you previously mentioned, I had a very fortunate opportunity to serve some time at NASA Ames, and I was working at the Space Biosciences division there. And some of the, in the capacity of an engineer, hardware engineer, developing payloads that were flown on the to the International Space Station. So with that kind of an experience that I brought in, definitely had to play a role. So if I had to choose the kind of microgravity research I'd like to start with, that was my first go-to option, because I was working with a lot of biologists, plant biologists and microbiologists at Amity University, and it came quite naturally from there. But if I think a little bit more about it, I think the focus has been to connect. So like, okay, just probably to define because we've used the word space biology, and there's astrobiology and then there's space biology. So in India, we kind of include space biology within astrobiology. For those who might not be familiar, space biology kind of focuses more on the human, or rather, it's the understanding of biology in space, and that knowledge is mainly to support humans in space, right? So we try to look at how do plants behave, mainly to understand what kind of food we'd like to grow, and also from a fundamental point of view, if you're trying to look at microorganisms, we try to study how do they behave, or how do they adapt to space flight, right? And the eventual goal, of course, is to support long duration human existence in space, right? So that's where space biology is. And of course, astrobiology is a much more broader understanding of how life has started and how it evolved, right? So just to kind of put those definitions out there for those who might not be familiar with it. In India, of course, we are at a very nascent stage, so we can't afford to have like space biology as a separate domain and then astrobiology like what we see in Europe and US and other places. So we kind of include it within the same sector. But to answer your question again, I think it was mainly driven by my own personal experiences. So we've gotten selected for fly 2 biology experiments with the Indian Space Research Organization. And it's also in line with what ISRO feels is one of the most relevant uses of research in space, or rather, let's put it this way, in low Earth orbit, close to Earth. And definitely they'd like to understand the impact of space on the astronauts will be flying into space. So that's kind of why we've chosen space biology as the first kind of microgravity research we want to embark on.
Definitely, Sid sir. We all wish you best for India's future. So that's a follow-up question for Dr. Julio. As space biology is a very fundamental part of an analog habitat, Professor, we have in Habitat Mart a greenhouse station, right? It's called the biohabitat, and I like it so much. There is food cultivation happening in the biohabitat, and I want to ask you whether astronauts are trained to grow their own foods when they travel to Mars or Moon and establish their own habitats. How difficult is that actually?
Yes, we have the greenhouse called biohabitat. Also, we have also a very active researcher, David Souza. Also, he's watching in YouTube today. We have 2 systems of aquaponics. The one called deep water culture. The second one is the grow bed. Also in the aquaponics, we have fish and also vegetables in the system. Also, I'd like to operate other systems based in hydroponics. Also, something interesting in Habitat Marte is our location close to a volcano. The name of the volcano is Cabugi, and we did a chemical analysis of the soil, identifying some common elements to analog soil used by NASA in JPL. This is very interesting because we can do some experiments using the soil. But in our case, in terms of our greenhouse, we have some challenges in terms of funding because we need to do more improvements in the greenhouse. Also, one of the challenges are high temperature inside. Also, we are in a mission, virtual mission, discussing what we can do to fix this. Also, but it's very interesting in terms of the results, scientific results. Also, that we are developing a lot of protocols applied to future space station. I believe this is one of the most important results. Yes, also some complementary, not less important, is the importance to try to see some possible spin-offs applied to our local communities, because it's happening in Brazil, in our facility, the worst drought. Also, it's a problem in America, in United States, in parts of Canada, in other parts of the world. We are affected by climate change globally. In this case, it's the worst drought, I believe, in the last 20 years. Also, if we developed some cultivation systems more smart in terms of the water usage. I believe this are very important to cultivate food like in closed systems, and this would be a good solution. Relate how to deal the lack of water in some regions affected by climate change. I believe this is a very important result. And based on this, we are keeping our movement. Also, I believe next weeks, I believe we are having more results, and we are very motivated relate to it. Thanks, Elon, for the question.
Definitely, Professor. So if you're not interested in analog astronaut research, you should definitely want to extend your applications to Habitat Mart as well. So yes, as a an analog app Habitat doesn't just focus on a research. It's everything starting from sustainability and also developing a great future in terms of humanity as one scale. So before we are going to that subject, I would like to ask Karen that do analog missions in general prepare sufficiently for potential psychological emergencies? Because I see being a multicultural environment, there must be some problems happening around crew psychology, and how does the selection process involve these kind of psychological emergencies and cross-cultural issues which may happen in the selection process?
Okay, very good question. I think today we haven't done nearly as much research as needed. I'm always a bit hesitant when some rocket scientists claim that, yeah, we can go to Mars by 2030. Yeah, maybe we have the rockets ready. We will not have people ready by then. We are still lacking psychological models, psychosocial trainings, everything. And there is very little intercultural training. So that of course increases the risk of something negatively happened, but it's also decreasing the risk of something positive happening. And in general, there is not so much training when it comes to psychology. I have actually spoken personally to a lot of astronauts who have been in space, to the ISS, to the former Mir station, and everybody told me that no, we did not. Some NASA astronauts, I asked them, what kind of psychological training did you get? And they said, none. So we have to ramp up on this. When it comes to selection for analog missions, the missions we are seeing currently are very, very different in terms of their selection process. There are some highly scientific missions with a selection process that is already very, very close to the selection process for the real astronauts, like the Austrian Space Forum. And there are other analog missions who don't have that high level selection criteria, and there is room for everybody. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. We need both, and we need more analog missions, a lot more, and we also need to learn as we go along. How can we improve the analog astronaut selection process? How can we improve the psychological well-being of people? Because we have, in most analog missions, we have physiological triggers, like if someone's heartbeat goes up over a certain number, or if the oxygen level in the spacesuit drops, then somebody will intervene and stop it. We don't have these thresholds well defined for psychological issues. Yeah, like when some analog astronauts just sits in the corner for a week and not communicates with the other ones. Yeah, we should intervene, but we don't have this, or at least I haven't seen any mission doing that yet. And I think it also needs to be included in the future in the analog astronauts training, that they, of course, they train for their research, how to operate a drill if they want to take geological samples, but also how to deal with medical emergencies, how to deal with psychological emergencies. And for doing that, we still need to kind of evolve with our analog missions as we go along.
Definitely. We have a long way to go, I can presume, from this. So as a habitat which involves people from varied backgrounds, it must have few of protocols which have to be followed in terms of psychological emergencies or any other kind of emergencies. So I see in this picture there comes mindfulness and meditation in a habitat. So these can be possible solutions, and they can be taken over not just by conventional methods, but also through lots of other areas like growing plants or having different kinds of food on a space habitat. That's one of an interesting research happening right now as well. So the very right person to ask this question to is Dr. Graham, a meditation instructor as himself. He would be the best person to answer how does meditation comes into picture in an analog habitat. And as Professor Julio pointed, there are spin-offs to be applied to Earth. So this is one of the main spin-off which can be applied on a large scale to all the people on Earth.
It's a wonderful question. And I do want to say, so I really loved Karen's answer a lot. We really haven't yet done the psychological work, the sociological work to understand human factors. We are still very much in the very beginning of learning about human factors for Mars exploration. I personally believe that mindfulness meditation practices in general are one tool to help us. I don't know if it's a solution necessarily. We're going to have to really consider the problems more deeply when there are certain issues coming up. Someone's mourning the loss of a family member from the orbit of Mars and the family member is back on Earth. These kinds of situations will eventually occur. And so meditation by itself might not fix that problem. You can't really fix that problem. But I think mindfulness and meditation practices will help our astronauts, help people in general, to have a better understanding of themselves when they approach these problems. Meditation for me has helped me a lot in my own life. I've suffered from depression in my own life, and meditation has helped me to not have control necessarily. There are still times where I feel out of control. We all do. But I think meditation helps me to ground myself, to feel like I have some more understanding of who I am inside. And it helps me to cut out some of that mental chatter that's always going on and telling me I should be doing this project and that project and that project. It helps me to kind of be with myself and really focus my energy and my time. The reason I think it'll be helpful for analog missions as well as for Mars missions is because it will kind of help people to frame what they're doing, why they are exploring, and it'll help them to frame, their own place in the mission, whatever that role is that they face in the habitat on Mars. They're going to have some role. I think meditation can help them to step back for a moment, to breathe and just be present before engaging with the role. There have been a lot of research studies out there on how meditation can impact us. There's a lot more research going on all the time to the benefits of meditation practices. And I for one, think that we should be teaching all children around the world various meditation practices to help them when they aren't really sure how to process certain emotions. We are human beings. We all go through emotional issues with extreme happiness, extreme sadness, with grieving and mourning and loss, with just not really understanding, with feeling, an existential loss, an existential displacement from the universe. And meditation can kind of help us to ground ourselves and to feel present with ourselves. And that by itself is a tool to then help us approach the solutions. And so I'd love to see everyone in the world, studying meditation practices, learning meditation practices. But I think it's one of those things that when we learn about the psychology, the sociology of humans going to Mars and to other worlds far beyond in the distant future, I think meditation practices will help us in finding those solutions down the road.
Definitely, Dr. Lau. I agree with that. And I also encourage all of whom this panel discussion is reaching to follow Dr. Graham's words, because we are all living examples of it. So just like how analog habitats or an example or a training for us to go to other planets as humans as one scale. It's the same when we are traveling from one country to another country and meeting different cultural people of different language and everything which is different from our background from theirs. So Dr. Siddharth, as a person who have lived and worked in multicultural environments, what do you feel about leaving the country and going to another country? Because many of the students, the next generation, they are traveling from one country, and initially we face few problems. And I want to ask you this question: like leaving your home country, for your education destination, what difference did it make, and what were the challenges you faced in terms of that? And you'd like to share that with our future generation.
I think it's a great training for anybody who is planning to get into this field of analog research, or even field research for that matter. When you're out in the desert working with different kind of people, multiculturalism, if it exists in your country, and if you're not living in a very homogeneous kind of a society, in some ways you're already kind of exposed to different kinds of cultures. But when I stepped out of India, I met a lot of people from different countries who came from relatively a lot more homogeneous groups. So for them, of course, it was even much of a larger gap that they had to overcome. I think for us here in India, every 100 kilometers you go in either direction, your language is going to change, your food is going to change. So we're in a way positively predisposed to being exposed to different kinds of cultures. And I used to joke that every time I came back to India, I used to get a cultural shock, even though I'm from India. There's always something new that you learn about a different group of people. But that's okay, right? So I think, but even then, moving to a different country, absolutely. Even for someone who's coming from a country that has different cultures, it is definitely a great learning experience. And I've been part of student societies wherein we kind of mentored students in our universities who came from India and other countries, to kind of help them get exposed and kind of not just get into a shell, right? Because that's the worst thing that can happen to you. And that's in some ways part to what Karen was saying as well, that in some ways when you're exposed to a new alien environment, you immediately start drawing these barriers, both mental and social barriers around yourself. And you try to find comfort spots and zones and stay there, which might work for some people for a certain duration. Sometimes you need that kind of space. So it's that fine balance between finding your individual space and also being able to share a communal space, where you can work with others. And that's something that while we were designing our habitat, coming back to that, it's also very important that how do you ensure that the layout of your habitat has enough space for somebody for his own personal space, but at the same time doesn't always keep him in there. And you don't really have cubicles for people to work in. There's shared places to eat food, to work, or whatever it is, right? So to just finally answer your question, I think if someone's getting an opportunity to venture out and study and learn, absolutely you should take that as and when that comes by. But having said that, I don't think it's a prerequisite, because there are many people who are not able to afford to go abroad to study. And that brings us back to this point of, these kind of internship opportunities that Blue Marble is offering, and similar other opportunities like listening to this panel here. And there's so much information available right now online. So the barriers have definitely gone down. You can definitely learn a lot. So it's not a prerequisite to be able to live and get a foreign degree, to be able to become a successful analog researcher or an astrobiologist. But if the opportunity is present, one should definitely try and aspire for it and try to make the most of it. Because in many times, there are several countries wherein you don't have the kind of opportunities that are needed, the kind of skill sets and the training that is needed. And in that case, it definitely makes sense to go and learn as much as possible.
Definitely, Dr. Siddhartha. I love your answer. And it must be a great help for our student community as well. So creating a homely environment in another country, in another place is a great deal. So imagine creating a homely environment on another planet on a whole scale. Like we can't open the door of our analog missions and get onto our home immediately. So talking about that, Dr. Julio, you have worked with people from around the world in a virtual habitat. So how do we make a homely environment when we go to other planet? It will definitely affect humans psychologically during the initial missions, right? So I have a funny questions for you. Like, do you think taking our pets to space will help us psychologically? I know definitely we are not in that stage of research yet, but it would be a fun question for our students who are listening.
This is a very good question. In my case, we have 2 dogs, 2 female dogs, also 1 female cat. It's a wonderful company. It's also, I believe, it's very interesting in our daily lives in terms of the connection with them. Also, sometimes it's very interesting in terms to help in deal with stress. I believe it's important in our daily lives on Earth, but for space exploration to help in a future settlement, I believe is a little more challenging. In terms of I believe in a first moment, no, I believe it's more difficult in terms to think about the resource to provide to feed the animal, and also to keep the operations, and also to keep the poop, some stuff like this. But in the future of space exploration, I believe it's a possibility. Also to consider. Also, yes. Also, I saw in some space analog stations in the world some company of some dogs, also in MBRS and other. Also in our location, we have two dogs also in the complex of Habitat Marte. They are very smart. But for the space exploration, I believe it's a interesting topic to consider. But maybe in a second or in a third stage of the operation of the real habitats.
Definitely, Professor. So anybody who's listening, willing to take their pets, like we would miss them when we go to space, so they can start the research now. So in decades after, we can take our pets to space with us as well. So we are not going to stop just there, because as you have seen now, every aspect what you can imagine, it can be put into space exploration. One such thing is mitigating climate change. So let's talk now how space sustainability or space exploration helps us in helping Earth. So we are in a very grave situation. Everything that is at stake, like the future generation is facing climate change, which is fastly pacing right now. So one such thing we can do with space exploration on a large scale is that how to create a sustainable development for the future. So I would like to ask this question to Dr. Graham. How does exploring space helps us in helping Earth?
Great question. First off, part of why we understand what's going on right now with climate, part of how we learned about climate change was because of space exploration. The sheer act of going into space and looking at our Earth from space, it allowed us to better understand our atmosphere, changes in the temperature, changes in seasonal patterns of the Earth. That allowed us to really start understanding a lot more about climate. Also, we went out into space and we found other worlds to explore and study. One of those worlds, Venus, the Earth's twin planet, is practically the same size as our world. It's not nearly as dense, but it's very similar to the Earth. And many of us think in the very early solar system, Venus might have had oceans. It might have been far more like the Earth, until a couple of things happened. One, we think at some point in the not too distant past, the surface of Venus melted. All of the surface melted. Most of the rocks on the surface of Venus appear very young. But also, Venus underwent a global greenhouse event, a runaway greenhouse effect, leading to this extremely thick and dense atmosphere. At the surface of Venus, the pressure is 92 times the surface here on Earth at sea level. The temperature is scorchingly hot. And that happened because of this continued greenhouse effect amplifying the temperature influx from the sun. And so Venus's surface is uninhabitable for life as we know it. By seeing that, by looking at a world like Venus and understanding its atmosphere a little bit more, it made us realize that a world can undergo a shift in its climate to such a drastic extent that it can actually alter the surface of that world for life. And that by itself was also something that really made us think more about what we're doing right now here on Earth, how quickly climate is changing here on Earth. And even though we don't quite know what's going to happen in the future because of climate change, we don't know how fast things are going to ramp up with diversity, intensity of storms, the changing in the increased temperature of the heating of the Earth, ocean acidification, all of these other issues that come with climate change. There's a lot we don't know, but by going to space, we can start answering some of our questions and start preparing not only for what's going to happen, but also how we can start turning things around and becoming more active members of this biosphere by actually making changes to help drive climate in a direction that's favorable for us. Now, we are not there yet. We still have quite some work ahead of us before we can make these big changes. Large-scale programs of carbon sequestration, of driving increased photosynthesis to draw down carbon, all these various projects, none of them are implemented in a global scale yet that's actually going to change climate. But we are right now at the very tip of learning how to do that. And another astrobiologist, David Grinspoon, one thing I love that he's remarked upon is that when it comes to this idea of the Fermi paradox, which isn't really a paradox, but it's this question placed by Enrico Fermi of, if there is alien life out there, and if faster than light speed travel is possible, then where are they? Why haven't we seen aliens? And I love that one of the possible answers to that question is that the aliens don't want to talk to us until they know that we can fix our own problems. And so maybe they're waiting to see us actually start turning things around and do these large-scale geoengineering projects on Earth. And so I think space exploration, many of us, we grew up dreaming of Star Trek and Star Wars and going to other worlds. And I certainly want to see humans on Mars. I want to send robots to Europa and Enceladus and Titan. I want to send more Voyagers, more probes out into the depths of the universe to start exploring space around us. But at the same time, one of the best things we've done in space exploration is to turn our cameras, to turn our instruments back around and to look at our home world. It's teaching us more about our place in the universe, but it's also allowing us to have much better understanding of what's going on in our atmosphere, in our oceans, on the surface of our world, in a way we never could before. And it's those data that are going to be necessary for us to actually implement these large-scale geoengineering practices that in the end might actually be necessary for the long-term success of our civilization.
Yes, definitely, Dr. Graham. So the participants would have known why aliens are not visiting us by now. So I'd like to ask Dr. Sid, you have this motive to use space as a tool to spread awareness and social consciousness. How do you think that in a large scale works, Dr. Sid?
So I can talk on citing an example of our upcoming Ladakh program, right? So we have this, we found ourselves working in this region where it would be completely unfair to ignore the importance of this site from the perspective of inspiring and reaching out to the local communities and working with them. So this place where we are in Ladakh, there's three things I can talk about. One is, because of the unusual amount of rainfall that Ladakh is seeing, and Ladakh is a cold, dry, the soil is not able to hold on to the precipitation, right? And that's why over the last 20 years, we have seen a lot of human loss of life and property destruction because of cloudbursts and landslides. So we find ourselves in this terrain that is seeing all of this crazy kind of weather phenomenon. That is the first thing. The second is the amount of glaciers that are melting over the next few years. There's reports that are showing us that over the next 80 years, the Himalayas are going to be glacier-free. There's not going to be any amount of freshwater storage, right? And imagine what that's going to do to the Indian subcontinent, the hundreds and millions of people who are living here, right? That's the second thing. We found ourselves in this glacier hotspot. And the third, one of the sites where we are working, it's actually a hot spring site. And hot springs are very, very exciting from astrobiology point of view. And more specifically, this particular hot spring that we're working at in this high altitude environment contains boron. It's one of the key tracers that is going to help us understand whether life actually started in the oceans or it actually started on land. And this entire hot spring field is now going to be, there's a massive geothermal project that is coming in and is going to be established there to support the local community, right? So there's this debate about preserving a site, but at the same time utilizing it to support communities living in these local environments, right? So we found ourselves sitting in the midst of so much of information and so many activities that are pertaining to not just space, but here to Earth. And that's why we decided to focus our energies towards that. And how exactly are we doing that? I think the place where you start is by working with kids and students, because that's something you can address easily. By taking students into that place, showing them what's happening, pointing to them towards different things, asking them questions and asking them to ponder about these things. That's one of the most basic things we can start with. I'm not talking about doing government advocacy or trying to bring in large industries and trying to improve the way they're going about things. That will take time and we will get there. But the first and foremost thing you have to do, and you can do, that is within our reach, is education. So that's what we are starting with. The second thing is interfacing with Earth scientists. There's this community of people who have been doing this for decades, right? And to come in as space scientists and start trying to redo these things or trying to, in a way, work in silos is not going to help. So that's the other thing that we did. There's this community of Earth scientists who have been doing hydrochemistry work, glacial work, environment ecology work, microbial diversity work, and we're trying to work with them to our own ends. And quite fortunately, we have not faced any hindrance or, for that matter, any kind of cynicism for that part. In fact, I can tell you that they have been more excited about it, because as soon as we start talking about climate change, they ask us, but what about Mars? That's the more exciting stuff they want to talk about. So we exchange knowledge. We tell them about how this place is important from a Mars perspective, and they tell us the kind of work they have been doing, right? So that's the kind of interface we're talking about, working with students, working across discipline with Earth scientists and people who are not traditionally looking at that region from an analog perspective. And lastly, the public. So interacting with people through the kind of opportunities you're giving us here today. We try to reach out to public, and we try to make people aware that this is not something that is going to happen 50 years from now. It's happening right now, right? So those are the small kind of incremental steps that we take. And we hope that the people who are involved here will go on to bring about that change, because it's not going to just come out of a few bunch of astrobiologists or analog researchers. It's going to take a large volume of people who will kind of take things forward.
Definitely, Dr. Siddharth. I just love your answer. And the participants, by now, they would have realized how multifaceted phases space exploration have. It doesn't have a single path and a single goal. It involves everybody in the process for a common goal, that is to make humans as one species and to see our planet as our one home. So by that description, I would like to extend my question to Dr. Julio. Dr. Julio, you have this motive to re-establish nature's connection with humans through your analog habitats. So how are you doing that, and what response did you get for it?
Yeah, we are recently we are inviting schools or some politicians try to visit our facilities. Yesterday, I live in Natal. It's 100 kilometers to in the coast. I live in the corner of South America, in the coast. But we driving 2 hours to countryside. The landscape changed so much, and we are inviting some publics, different publics, like the public management to see what we are doing and try to identify the possibilities to apply to local communities. Also, in this case, we are discussing two main topics: is space as a field of research and education. Also trying to motivate the students to be committed with science, because locality here, a lot of students not concluding the high school, and they like to show them that the studies and the education can be funny, also integrating with space, and because a lot of them are interested in space and also interested to be astronauts. And the scientific and discussion making a link with education is very important. The STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And the second approach is related to sustainability and try to show that what we are doing is applied to also rural communities. Also, it's possible to adapt to apply in cities in terms of how to operate the self-sustaining habitats. Because the self-sustaining habitats, our main goal is related to sanitation, to try to collect and treat the sewage. Also, the renewable energy, the use of renewable energy, in this case, solar panels. And the third topic is related to food cultivation in closed systems using greenhouses, also aquaponics and hydroponics. And these kind of topics are very interesting to apply in our daily lives, I consider. Yes, and we are trying to. Yes, yesterday we received 2 different visits from public managers. Yes, I'm trying to show that what you're doing related to space is also applied to our daily problems.
Yeah, that's interesting, Dr. Julio. So as we have seen now, space exploration has many faceted phases, and anybody from any background, they can involve themselves and have a great future for humanity, making humanity as a one species for our planet Earth. With that, I would ask a question of how important is sending these civilians to space? What is the importance of a layman or a normal person to get the overview effect? Dr. Lau, would you like to go first on answering this question?
Absolutely. I've been embattled lately in some Twitter debates over the value of billionaires sending themselves into space. As many people know, Unity 22 just went up with Richard Branson and his fellow crew to the edge of space. We have next Tuesday on the 20th, on the anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing, Jeff Bezos is going up on New Shepard with a few other people. We have several other launches coming up. Inspiration 4, Rook Isaacman, another billionaire, is launching into space, but also taking a wonderful crew along with him. And then obviously, Elon Musk is currently working on a lot of projects through SpaceX for getting people into space in other ways, especially with Starship, which will come soon. And I think, I've been discussing this with a lot of people because a lot of people are very angry that it's these super wealthy billionaires who are going into space. But I think a lot of those same people are unaware that many of the crew members who are going along with them are not billionaires. They're scientists. There's other civilians. My friend Cyan Proctor is going to become the very first civilian astronaut pilot for Inspiration 4, which is incredible. And then with Virgin Galactic, even though the original tickets were all $250,000 US, to get a ticket for one of these launches, that price tag will eventually come down. And I think we're going to see more of this philanthropic process where, yes, the billionaires want to go to space, but they're going to take other people along with them. With the Dear Moon project, we have this potential for 8 artists to go and travel around the moon. I think this by itself is going to increase, not decrease, the perspective of humanity, seeing our world from space, experiencing the overview effect, that term coined by Frank White in 1987 to explain the psychological shift that astronauts feel upon seeing the Earth as one world in space and understanding that we as a human species are part of this world in space. And so I'm excited for the future of civilian astronautics and what we're going to see very soon. And to those who think, oh, well, right now it's just billionaires, they're wrong. It's not just billionaires. It will be very wealthy people at first, and we can't argue against that. For the most part, it's going to be wealthy people, but there are many groups who are trying to find ways to increase the diversity, to include more people from around the world. For instance, Richard Branson announced after the flight of Unity 22, he's partnering along with Space for Humanity and Omaze in a contest where you can enter to donate some money to Space for Humanity, and in return, you might win 2 seats on a Virgin Galactic flight next year. I entered into it because, one, I would love to go on a flight with Virgin Galactic up over 80 kilometers above the Earth. But two, Space for Humanity is a nonprofit who are specifically working to raise funds and raise awareness to try to get individuals from around the world into space. To anyone from any background can apply to become an astronaut with them to go into space. And we're going to see more and more of this. I think the very near future of space exploration is going to be incredible. I think a lot more young women, people of color, people from various nationalities and ethnicities from around the world are going to start seeing people who look just like them, who speak and think and feel and emote just like them in space. And I think we're going to see a lot more young people, young children and teenagers, people in their 20s, becoming very inspired about their own potential for becoming astronauts, for going into space, and for taking humanity to the stars.
Definitely, I agree. And as a person who is much interested in space, and I am so excited for the future it holds for us. Karen, would you like to add on this question as well?
Yes, I think one aspect that is very often or almost always overlooked is the question, why do we spend all this money on space exploration and not here on Earth? Every single cent we are spending on space exploration is spent here on Earth. We are not shooting money into space. The money from space exploration goes into companies on Earth, and they are very often, they are startups, they're employing young people, they're employing people in countries that are not so well off. Every single cent is spent here on Earth to make life better for someone.
Yes, definitely. That's a really valid point, which has to go out in the world, I think so. So last question to Dr. Siddharth. How do you see the future as a space scientist? What's waiting for us in the future? And especially for India?
That's a big question. I'll try to tackle that quickly. I think life is going to definitely improve communication. We will be more dependent on space, specifically the low Earth orbit, not just for communication, but also for weather predictions and just kind of monitoring our planet and improving our own kind of transportation. There might even be ways in which we can go, rather than flying through the atmosphere. Who knows, Virgin has opened up a new barrier through which we're actually going suborbital, and then we kind of go back into the orbit and land. Who knows, there could be different ways in which you could travel across our planet as well, right? So those are the kind of things, the transformations we're kind of looking ahead with. Unfortunately, I feel there will always be battles, there'll always be conflicts, there'll always be superstition, but there will be stronger powers to fight against that, I feel, when more and more people kind of get together. I think in general, we are moving in the right direction. And if you avoid to look very carefully at some of the smaller blimps that are always taking place, the larger picture, I think, is that we will have a greater sense of consciousness of who we are in this universe. That's the kind of hope that I have as a space scientist moving forward.
Definitely, that's the hope I have for our future humanity as well. And with that, I end this panel. It was so delightful and insightful to have all of you at this one place. I would also love to end my panel with a short picture which inspires me. So this is it. It's a quote from Carl Sagan's book, and it's a quote just telling that, look at that dot, that's here, that's home, that's us. So this was the picture taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft from the orbit of beyond Saturn. So the dot, what we see here, is our Mother Earth, and that's home, that's us. And with that, I would love to tell all the Earthlings that this is home. We have to do all our best in terms of our efforts to make our home the best for us to stay. I would love to thank all the wonderful panelists who have joined me. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much again. If you have any last words to share, I'll be happy as well.
Yeah, if I may share a last word, I would encourage young people, or young in spirit, not necessarily young in calendar days, There is space for everyone in the space industry.
Yeah.
If you're not into STEM, we need space psychologists, we need space lawyers, we will need bookkeepers on Mars, we will need
Yeah.
salespeople, we will need warehouse workers, we will need janitors in space companies later on in space. There is really, if your dream is to work in space exploration, there is space for you there.
Yes. So I was about to conclude with the same quote which Karen just described. There is space for everyone in space. Ad Astra, with hard work, let's go to space, let's reach the stars. So thank you so much for this panel and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Congratulations. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah,
Thank you.
namaste.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Ad Astra, have a great day. I think live should be on. Nitin, can you hear us? You can stop the live now.
What is it? You have some explanation for that? We have none. Don't worry. Continue your program. Oh boy, it's really something super fantastic here. You couldn't ever imagine this.